Guys, what is your calling in life? What is the thing that you are compelled to do in this one life you've been given? You know, someone once said, we're all given one chance to live, but if we do it right, once is enough. So find out how to discover your calling today. Men in the Arena Army, we salute you. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the Men in the Arena podcast. This is Equipping Men in 10. I'm Jim Ramos, your host and guide of today's podcast and Spotify's #1 podcast for Christian men, guiding you to your best version of the stress bubble of life and beyond. So guys, I want to dive into the meat of this podcast. This podcast episode is going to take some work on your part. It's going to take some deep thinking and processing on your part. So I just want to warn you ahead of time. We've done other podcasts in the past that talk about your spiritual shape, that talk about your purpose. So we're going to take a different angled look at how you discover your calling in life. So again, I'll go back to what I believe are the 3 most important questions a man can ever ask. Who am I? Why am I here? And what am I going to do about it? We have podcast episodes of each of those. But as you're answering, especially those first 2 questions, who am I and why am I here? You want to do it to discover your calling. What has God called your life to? Now, here's what a calling is not. A calling is not your career. Your career will change. Your source of income will change, especially in the younger generations. They are much more mobile, highly mobile, and transitionary in their jobs. And so your job, your career will change. So your career is not your calling. Your cares are not your calling. By cares, I'm saying your wife and kids are not your calling. Now, I hear a lot of you pushing back going, whoa. You tell me I'm called to love my kids and to love my wife. Yes, I do tell you that. This is a biblical mandate. So it's a calling at a lower level, like a 10,000-foot level. You are mandated in Scripture to love your wife, to live out the Bible, to live out what the Bible teaches in obedience, to raise your children, to serve in your community. These are things that you're called to do. This is so these things that you deeply care about, although you are called to do about that, you are called to do them. You are called from a mandate perspective. Every man is called to love his wife, to love his children, to provide for them, to serve in the community. So this is a general thing that we're all called to take care of the things we care about. Your calling is also not your causes. In other words, the areas where you serve, the areas where you volunteer, the areas that you financially supply resources to, these are causes that you deeply care about. And you may be called to them, but they are not your calling. These are all 10,000-foot level things. So these are all very, very important things, right? Your career is very important. The things you care about, your wife and children are very important. Your causes that you support are very important. But these are really under the umbrella of something higher level. That higher level is called your calling. So your calling is bigger than what you do now. Your calling, now here it is right here. Your calling is about why you are doing it. Another way that you can say this is your calling is your compelling. It's the thing that compels you the most. In 1 Corinthians 9:16 and 17, Paul says, "For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for I am under compulsion. For woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this voluntarily, I have reward, but if against my will, I have a stewardship entrusted to me." Now you may say, well, there it is. That's his compelling. Well, it's getting closer to his compelling. He's under compulsion to do this thing called preaching the gospel. But if we dig a little deeper into Romans chapter 1, verse 5, we read this. Through whom, Paul's writing again, he says, through whom we have received the grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith among the Gentiles for his name's sake, among whom you are also called of Jesus Christ. In Galatians 2:8, Paul continues, he says, for he who effectively worked for Peter in his apostleship and to the circumcised, in other words, to the Jewish people, effectively worked for me also to the Gentiles. We know from Scripture over and over again, Paul was called to be an apostle, and he's the first one to do it, to the Gentiles. So his calling or his compelling was not to preach the gospel, it was to preach the gospel to the Gentiles, to write to the Gentiles. You and I are here today. If you are not Jewish, you and I are here today in part because Paul was caused to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. That was his calling. So as you try to answer the question, what is my calling or what is my compelling? Here are 4 things I want to tell you. First of all, what is your why? What is your compelling? Why do you do what you do in life? So what's the overline, or you could say even underlying theme of why you do what you do? What is your calling? My calling is to my ministry call is to minister to men, but I have a deeper calling. I have a deep, deep desire to be significant in my life and to leave a legacy. Number 2, why were you created and placed in this geographic area? I'm in Oregon. You may be in Alabama. You may be in New Hampshire. You may be in Texas. You may be in Alaska. Why did God put you there for this season? Number 3, why are you here in this time in history? You know, you could have been put in, God could have, after God made you, he could have put you 5,000 years ago. He could have put you 5,000 years from now. But God has placed you here now. And that was not by accident. Why are you here now? And I would say this, when I'm in doubt, I ask my wife. I go to Shannon, I go, hey, honey, what do you think? What am I compelled to do? Like, what drives me? What is my inner compelling? What is that thing that pushes me forward? And our wives are so insightful, man. They're so smart. And they want you to be your best version, probably more than you do. And your wife, if you ask her for the loving truth, she will tell you. And just be ready for it. It might change your world. And it will definitely change your life. So here are 3 ways that you can discover this undercurrent, this calling of your life. The first one is this. And this was so powerful in my life. And this happened this happened almost 30 years ago. I was just barely in my 30s. Eulogy. Write your own eulogy. Now remember, an obituary is something that people write that goes into a newspaper. It's what they write about kind of the accomplishments that you had in your life. A eulogy is something that your loved ones write or express to honor your life and your impact on your life. So I would say the eulogy is a little bit different in the sense that it highlights who you were to the people you love. In other words, how are you remembered by those closest to you? This moves beyond your career and your resume. So when you write your eulogy, it is a big picture of your life more than the daily grind about your life. It is a macro look into your life, not a micro. It doesn't look at your job and your resume. It's a macro look at your life. It's eternal versus temporal. It's got, are people who love you going to speak of eternal things about your life? It's heavenly versus earthly. So I've noticed when I've gone to funeral services, memorial services, there are no more than 3 themes that permeate a person's life. So 100 years can be reduced to 3 things. I was just at a good friend of mine's funeral, Gary Ballantyne. 3 themes overwhelmed his life. He loved children and youth, he loved Jesus, and he loved to serve. That was just overwhelming. It was overwhelming. I thought, what a great way to eulogize Gary's life. He loved Jesus, he loved children and youth, and man, he loved to serve. Man, that is a home run, Gary. Well done. So another way to do this, besides the eulogy, so I would say take time and write your eulogy. I mean, now bring a tissue. I can't read mine without crying, and I wrote it 30 years ago. So make sure you write your eulogy out. The next thing I would say is this: what is your heart's desire? What are you just incredibly passionate about? What is this thing that just seems to drive and motivate you? Some people call it a Popeye moment. It's this thing that you can't stand it. You can't stand no more. It's a passion that drives you. It may be something that really breaks you, really breaks your heart. Is there something in your life that there's a deep, I know a lot of people that are driven by money. I'm just not driven by money. I'm not. I like money. I love to spend money, but money is just not something that is a heart's desire. It's not a motivator. It's just not. I am driven by significance, way more than money. So the third thing is this. What is your history? So your eulogy is you standing where you are now in the present, looking way out into the future. Where when I'm talking about your history, I'm saying where you're standing now, look backwards and see what has happened in your life so far. In other words, when in your life did you feel the most alive? What were you doing in that moment? What stories do you share the most often with others, and why are you sharing them? What past events make you emotional with joy? What makes you come alive? What vivid memories do you wish to recreate? So when you go back into your life and you look back on those things, they give you a real good perspective of what you may be called to. So I would just say this. The best way to find your calling is just to take these 3 categories, take the 4 questions I mentioned earlier, and to begin to connect the dots and just kind of map them out and see what God is actually, what God has placed on your life as an ultimate calling on your life. Guys, if this episode helped you, and I know this episode is going to require a lot of thought, or maybe listening to this multiple times. And if this podcast is helping you overall, make sure you are clicking that subscribe button. When you do that, it helps us to move up in the charts, which gives us greater visibility to other people, which helps us to impact more lives for Jesus. Until next time, feel the wet sand on the arena floor. Hear the deafening roar of the crowd. Taste the sweetness of victory. Get in the game, get dirty, grind it out.